Don't have to if you don't need to. We're actually live. I normally start this by blathering on about something, something irrelevant. So I'm happy to be here with Dre. I'm going to say your name wrong already, even though I asked you how to say it just 2 minutes ago. Dre Rusavuk. Yeah. Okay. Great. Nice.
You got it.
Thanks. And you are a so you doing your PhD at Birmingham University, was that right?
So I've defended my dissertation in 2023.
2023. Okay, cool.
Yeah, 23, yeah.
Nice. And that was on this kind of topic, I suppose, moral luck.
It was on, yeah, exactly, sort of applications of luck to perfect being theism.
Okay, excellent. Birmingham University in the UK is a good philosophy of religion place. It's good
Yeah, I was
stuff
with
going on.
Eugene, yeah, Nagasawa, who left to more maybe favorable grounds. I don't know. He was a great mentor, and Alistair Wilson was on my committee as well.
Was he? Oh, great. I really like Alistair Wilson.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice chat. Cool. Okay, good. And then, so today we're going to talk about Molinism and moral luck, and your nice paper that was called Molinism's Kryptonite. I suppose that was the title, and the subtitle was like Molinism and moral luck or something, right?
That's right. Something boring. Yeah. You got to get it with that first line. Yeah.
Definitely. I'm on more for philosophy papers that have puns and funny names and stuff. Definitely. We need more of that. Okay, cool. So let's get us going with maybe you can introduce Molinism for us and just set the scene. Like, what is Molinism? What's it about? I guess just to key it up, it's a proposed solution to a problem that this guy Joseph Molina came up with in the 1600s. So what was the problem he was trying to solve, and what was his solution to it?
Yeah. So Molinism is basically a view of divine providence, and specifically meticulous providence. So Molinists want to defend the view that absolutely everything is under God's control, direct or indirect control. And the problem is like, well, if everything is under direct control, like what about the problem of evil? What about all these bad things that happen in the world? What about human agency? And so Molina, he proposed meta knowledge, or a way to resolve this problem in which God could be totally in control of all things, but also humans, creatures, as as we refer to them, have libertarian freedom. So it's a model of divine providence, and maybe even divine omniscience, how God can order the world based on the knowledge that He has.
Okay, so it contrasts with like Calvinism, say, where Calvin kind of bites the bullet and says, "Yeah, God's in control of everything," and I guess that just means people aren't really free in the kind of robust
Yeah,
libertarian sense or whatever. And
exactly.
Molina wants to have both his cake and eat it at the same time. Right?
Yeah, and I guess the other sort of on the spectrum, it would be like, yeah, we have free will, but sometimes God just doesn't know how we're going to use that free will, because there are maybe like things about future actions that are just unknowable. So this would be like maybe a free will or a open theist response.
Mm.
So of course, Molina's like, no, 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 both of these things like that would be bad, because God has perfect omniscience, and yeah, He exercises sovereignty over all of creation, and you can have both of those things. That's the appeal of Molinism. Yeah.
Hmm.
Allegedly, I guess I should say.
That's right. That's what it says on the tin, but it's not necessarily what you get.
That's- yeah, you got to
So
get into the weeds. Yeah.
yeah, indeed. So some of the weeds that we've got to get into involves like counterfactuals and particularly this type of counterfactuals that have come to be known as counterfactuals of creaturely freedom.
Mhm.
Right. So maybe do you want to unpack what that term is? What's a counterfactual of creaturely freedom?
Yeah. So counterfactuals are basically conditional propositions about, like, they're in the subjunctive mood. So they would say something about what the human would do in that particular circumstance. Um, there's been some pushback on this term counterfactual, because they're not all counter to fact, right? But so we can just call them like conditionals. They're conditionals of human freedom. So the idea is that God knows if you were to place this person in this situation, this person would freely do such and such an action. This goes for any possible situation whatsoever that a human acts. So those are counterfactuals of freedom. The important thing for Molinists is that these counterfactuals, they are freedom preserving. So they don't eliminate your freedom to do A or B, let's say. It's just that God knows what you would have done in those precise circumstances for any action whatsoever.
Right. So it's like you say something like, I have this coin that's in my pocket, and I'm not going to bring it out and flip it. But if I had flipped it, then it would have landed heads. So it's something like that, right?
Exactly. Except, right, that case doesn't involve like human agency. So
I
on
suppose that's
Molinism,
true,
on Molinism, God even knows counterfactuals of, I mean, like maybe natural or probabilistic events or something like that. But maybe even more shockingly is, or more startlingly, is that God knows counterfactuals of freedom, and all this before humans ever existed. I mean, like before anything ever existed at all, like logically prior to creation. God knows. Um, if I were invited to this podcast, I would say yes. And like God knows that even if He had never created me. So
yeah.
these counterfactuals, the truth value of the counterfactuals, they don't depend on me, and they also don't depend on God. So there's that.
Right. That's always the bit that bugs me because, well, we'll come on to that. Maybe we'll come
Yeah.
on to that in a bit. So, like, I guess imagine there's some like monk, and he's taken himself away from the earthly temptations of the big city or whatever, and he's living in a monastery just with a load of other monks, right, living their peaceful existence up there. And in that environment, there's no temptations for him whatsoever. So he lives a very holy life because he's just up there with nothing to tempt him. Is the idea with this that God is able to see his real character because he knows that even though this guy hasn't been tempted, had he been tempted, then he would have given in to the temptation or whatever? Is that like, is it the idea? Actually don't know what this is. It supposed to be that God's able to kind of judge you for things you didn't actually do?
Yes. Yeah. Precisely. Hmm. And yeah, right. God does this for any possible situation. Um, Even like if you were abducted by aliens and found yourself on Mars, in that situation, you would freely do X, right? Or if you invented a time machine or something like that. So for like any situation that it involves a free decision of yours, God knows what you would have done in that precise situation. And this is for all possible people. Yeah. So there's something, I mean, there's maybe like different ways to explicate this, but it's something about maybe God being so intimately, I don't know, familiar or knowing your essence that God just knows all of these facts about your possible constitution in those circumstances. Yeah.
And does on Molyneux's view, or I guess it doesn't really matter what his original view was, but Molinism in general is taken to be developed. Is that like relevant for your salvation then? Like, take this monk guy who doesn't have any temptations. Can he still go to hell because if he had been tempted, he would have given into it?
That's more that's more controversial. I guess
Uh-huh.
it depends on which possible world does God take into account judging your deeds and
Mm.
beliefs. So if you think that the only world that matters is the actual one, then no. This is the only relevant world in considering whether or not you're like blameworthy or praiseworthy for some act. Of course, but I actually don't know any Molinists that hold this position, but I guess somebody could argue that other worlds are all, or at least the worlds that are close enough, similar to the present world, those worlds are also relevant for your damnation. I think that would open just a large can of worms that I think Molinists probably be better off staying away from
Mm.
affirming something like that. But yes, these counterfactuals are relevant to your salvation, because you can ask like, well, the person who dies, like never heard the gospel or something like that. If they had heard the gospel, could they have repented and obtained, or be credited like, with salvation or something? And again, these are tricky questions, because if you say yes, then it's like, well, then why didn't God put him in that situation? So, but that might be like too far afield. But in short, yes, counterfactuals do matter to your salvific choices.
Right, because it goes to your character and just sort of says not just what you're actually like, what you happen to actually be like, but what you would have been like if things were different. So it's like a big rounded picture of who you are in a really deep sense, I guess.
I don't know any Molinists that hold that view. I guess you could argue like, okay, well, if God is so intimately somehow familiar with your essence, then why does God focus on like this one possible world in which you make actions instead of the infinite possible worlds, right? And if actually in the vast majority of those possible worlds you do the right thing, it's just that in the actual world you do the bad thing, then it might be that those possible worlds should outweigh your moral blameworthiness, even if you do the right thing in some. That's interesting. You should write a paper on that.
It's how assholes get to heaven. It's that they just an actual asshole, but a possible nice guy. And then
That's right.
That's why you get
That's
down.
right. That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, cool. So Molinism, yeah, we'll come back to it because like we might have some like chats about like reasons to doubt it and different reasons, but let's kind of get further into your the idea from your paper. So in addition to Molinism, we also need to cover this notion of like moral luck. So tell us more about moral luck. So where does that come from? Like philosophically speaking, who came up with this idea and what is it?
So, I mean, I guess let's start by just maybe defining, or at least saying something about the term luck. In the relevant literature, so Thomas Nagel and Bernard Williams in the 1970s, maybe early 1980s, they started individually and separately bringing to attention this idea that there's a conflict in our moral intuitions, the way that we actually judge people, and then what we hold about the way in which we should judge people. And they use the word luck without offering an analysis or anything. Since that time, there's been multiple accounts of the nature of luck. But I think for our purpose, we could just think of luck as something that's beyond the control of the agent. So you're lucky, like if you win the lottery, because maybe primarily it was beyond your control. There was nothing that you could do to like ensure that you win the lottery. So we could just use the word luck at that level, something that's beyond the agent's control. Moral luck has to do with like, okay, so you do this, and then something as a matter of luck comes about, and then our moral judgments differ either between agents in identical situations, or even between you across possible worlds. So if luck plays a difference in how we are evaluated, whether we're counted as blameworthy or praiseworthy, then luck has made a difference. I mean, think of like a simple example. Let's see. This is from one of the examples I use in my paper. Like, say two teenagers roll boulders down the hill, because teenagers do interesting things, and they're like, wow, that would be cool. And it just so happens that one of the boulders maybe picks up speed a little bit faster, jumps the rail or the fence or whatever, and crashes on a vehicle down the road. We would hold that agent morally responsible, even though, like, how fast or at least we would blame them, right? And we would blame them probably more than the other teenager whose boulder sort of rolled down the hill but came at a rest and nobody was hurt. So it's intuitive that we ascribe more blame to one of the teenagers, even though the boulder gaining velocity and then jumping over the fence was totally beyond the agent's control. So that seems right. That seems intuitive. That seems reasonable. But then philosophers say, but wait a minute, what about this common intuitive belief that we're only accessible for things that are within our control? So if I push you and you stumble into somebody else and they spill their coffee, they're not morally responsible, and you're not morally responsible because it was beyond your control whether or not I pushed you. Sometimes this is referred, or often it's called the control principle. So we're responsible for things only if they're within our control. So how can both of those things be right? We hold people, or we want to hold people responsible only for things that they control, but also sometimes we hold people responsible, or we ascribe different degrees of blame, let's say, even though luck played a important factor. I mean, our law seems to like make this distinction, right? Um, and then in just in our everyday evaluations of other people. So this is what's meant by moral luck, and there's like 4 different kinds. There's resultant, consequential, constitutive luck, and causal luck is what they call them. Yeah, I mean that's like the basic gist of it.
And are you able to unpack those 4 different types off the top of your head?
Yeah, constitutive luck has to do with like the kind of person that you are and how you react in certain situations, whether or not whether or not you're evaluated in terms of blame or praise, and that's based on your constitution. But since you have no control over your constitution, luck seems to make a difference here. I mean, circumstantial luck. The famous example from Nagel was like, it's possible that if you were born in Nazi Germany, you went to a school that just brainwashed you with like Nazi propaganda. You eventually grew up and willfully became a soldier, like in one of the concentration camps that did really bad things. But had your family moved to Argentina like the week before you went to school, you would have been like an exemplary citizen in Argentina. What made the difference here is something beyond your control, namely that your parents took you out of Nazi Germany. But had you stayed in Nazi Germany, there's that like counterfactual, right? You would have become a guard in a concentration camp. So that's circumstantial luck. Resultant luck is 2 agents perform the same action, but one is more blameworthy. So 2 assassins trying to kill this one person and they fire a bullet, like my bullet actually hits the target. I'm blameworthy. Your bullet, you also have the same intention. We have the same plan. Let's say we fired the bullet at the same time, but your bullet, like a bird just flies out in front of your bullet and your bullet doesn't hit its target. Okay, you didn't actually kill your target and I did, but the sort of determining difference here was something beyond both of ours control. That's the bird flying and the trajectory of the bullet. But still, it seems reasonable to blame me more than you. I've actually done something really bad. And then causal luck, that has to do with like free will. In the literature, sometimes that's terms called like present luck, specifically when it comes to like libertarian actions and these causes also that we don't have any control over. They contribute to what we do in the present. But like in ethics, it's mostly, I would say, those 3 things that have been the focus on: consequential, resultant, circumstantial, constitutive luck.
Right. And we're going to focus on circumstantial luck, I think.
Circumstantial, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, like, moral luck is about, like, it's that tension that pulls against the idea you think you're morally responsible only for those things you can actually control and do stuff about. Seems right. But also, the circumstances can conspire sometimes to make 2 people who are doing broadly the same thing, only one of them seems like they're the person who's morally responsible. So we have these like conflicting intuitions, and there's this big problem about how to resolve those 2. And like it's kind of just a head scratching kind of problem that's not like fully resolved. Right? There's not like an agreed solution to this in ethics or whatever. It's just like loads of different ideas, and it's just a big puzzle, right? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, there's just a ton of literature on there. Some philosophers say that the luck itself is it just doesn't exist. It's basically an illusion. There are some say that moral luck does exist, but like maybe only one of the like species of moral luck exists. Like maybe it's just constitutive luck. Some argue that no, all kinds of moral luck exist. Yeah, so I don't think this problem has been resolved, and it's just generated a ton of different positions, and it's there's just too much. Kind of like the free will debate.
Yeah.
It's hard to know like where did we end up, because it's just like arguments, counter arguments, replies to those replies, additional principles, additional counter arguments. I think it's similar in the moral luck debate.
Yeah, that's pretty much philosophy in general, though, isn't it? It's like
Yeah. I
everything
mean, you're not wrong. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think there's another thing we need to talk about a bit before we crack into how this puzzle works, which is this notion of like praiseworthiness and responsibility, right? So I suppose it'll matter more later on, but I think there's a distinct notion of like moral praiseworthiness or moral blameworthiness, which I guess is just like the two poles of the same idea, and they could be distinguished from different types of praiseworthiness and blameworthiness. Like, I guess I have in mind some idea like you might say someone is really good. I don't know, Usain Bolt or something. He's like really good at running, and in a sense, you could be like, I don't know, praise him for being really good at running. You could certainly be like in awe of his running abilities and like look up to him or something. Have some positive kind of attitude towards him for that. Um, but then maybe he like helps an old lady across the road or something, and now we're sort of giving him some that positive attitude, but it's not to do with like his his good skill at running or something, which is presumably morally neutral. Now we're thinking, well, he's like doing something good. His action is good, so I'm gonna kind of reward him, give him a treat or something for being nice and helping the old lady
Yeah.
across
Yeah.
the road, right? So we've got this notion of like, I think, I mean, you can probably explain this better than me, but is that right that we've got at least two, maybe there's a whole load, a whole raft of these different versions, but
Yeah.
like different notions of praise and blameworthiness.
I mean, I think that's right. I think like we can call it like a action-centered praiseworthiness or something like that, where a person deserves praise for something that they do, and
Mm.
then I don't know, non-action centered, I don't know, account of praise where, yeah, like somebody's, I mean, I don't know. Do we praise? I mean, like yeah, we would praise somebody for being like athletic, even though it's not an action. It's not something that's directly under the control, or maybe somebody that's like really good looking, somebody that's like intelligent. I think those are praiseworthy traits, even though that person didn't bring about that feature. So, I mean, I think you're right. I think that's pretty intuitive to think like that. And that's kind of what I went with the assumption, I guess, I went with when I was writing this paper, is that there are different ways to praise agents, some for who they are and some based on what they've actually done.
Hmm. Okay, and then I think because so now we've got these pieces in place, we've got this like Molinism, the idea of moral luck, and the notion of like moral praiseworthiness, where it's like having a positive attitude towards somebody for the in terms of the actions that they do, not just simply for what they are
Yeah.
or something, right? So how does this work then? So like explain how does this mean this is Molinism's kryptonite?
Okay, so let's go back to Molinism. Okay, so logically, prior to God actualizing or creating like any possible world whatsoever, because God has middle knowledge, God knows if He decides to create humans that have libertarian freedom, there are certain things that God like can't bring about. So in Molinism, certain worlds, like possible worlds, which is like a total description of like a total description of the state of affairs that obtains. Some of those worlds are infeasible. They're logically possible, but they're not feasible for God to actualize. So a world in which like, if God knows via middle knowledge that if I um, receive a invitation to go on your podcast, but I refuse, if that's like in those circumstances, then God can't actualize a world in which everything remains the same, but I refuse. That world would be infeasible for God to actualize. Okay, then we can say like, okay, what does feasibility or feasibility like depend on? Does it depend on God? And Molinists acknowledge this. No, it does not depend on God. It depends on which counterfactuals are true. So if the truth value of counterfactuals, or the set of all counterfactuals, right, is not dependent on God, and this is called like a creaturely world type, the set of all true counterfactuals, it could have been different. Then God's creative options are limited. I use the word limited. I don't mean like, I don't think this really says anything about his like omnipotence or anything like that. This is just like it would be a metaphysical impossibility for God to actualize a world that is infeasible. So I don't think this reflects on God poorly. Like, there are objections to Molinism, like, oh, God is like, he's not omnipotent and all that. I'm not sure those objections are good. So, but Molinists acknowledge that given the truth of the counterfactuals, some worlds are actualizable and some worlds are not actualizable. Well, suppose God's like, okay, I'm gonna actualize a world in which free creatures exist. Then God looks, and I don't know if you can see like scare quotes, right? Like God is looking at like all of these possible worlds that are available for him to actualize. Some worlds have like these worlds have different, like maybe different features. Some worlds there are only X amount of goodness. Some worlds there are different amounts of like maybe salvific goodness, how many people like repent and believe the gospel. So there are all kinds of different values that God is considering when actualizing the world. But where I say that this seems to be an instance of circumstantial luck is because these counterfactuals that are outside of God's control, they limit what he can do in that situation, like in that scenario. Once God sees the available counterfactuals, because they're not dependent on him, so the truth value is already like it's contingent. It's not necessary that this counterfactual was true; it could have been false. But the important thing is it's not dependent on him, and so God is constrained by which worlds he's available to actualize. Why is this a problem? Well, if God decided to create humans, I keep saying creatures, but humans that have libertarian free will, it's possible that a world in which there's sufficient amount of goodness exists because some of these people do morally good actions. It's possible that that world could have been infeasible. So whether or not God could create people that have libertarian freedom and in which there's a sufficient amount of good in that world is beyond God's control. So it seems like it's a matter of circumstantial luck that God is able to actualize a world that has goodness in it, or a sufficient amount of goodness. And I mean, you can apply this to all kinds of different values and different goods. So if God is praiseworthy for bringing about this world, yeah, he's praiseworthy for that. But if the counterfactuals would have been different, he could have bring about even a better world in which maybe there's even greater goods or more like salvific goodness, even more people go to heaven. And so it seems that if we properly and reasonably attribute praise to agents for their actions, and if their actions could differ in different circumstances, some actions would reasonably necessitate greater praise. So I just applied that framework to God.
Right. So then, logically, prior to God creating or actualizing the world, he sort of like looks out on this framework, all these possible worlds in front of him. Some of them are feasible and some of them are not feasible. And then he basically tries his best to make the most of this. Right? Let's make the best world we can. He says to himself, something like that. And the thought is that like, if the feasible worlds had been in general a lot worse, then the best world he could have made would have been like a lot worse, right? Maybe just the luck of the draw kind of thing. In all the feasible worlds, we're both complete assholes all the time,
Yeah.
right? And then that just mean everything else being basically the same, but me and you are just like way more annoying than we actually are. And if that was the case, then let me turn these things off. Oh, I can do that. Christ. Okay, yeah. If that was the case, then maybe in a world everybody is like trans world depraved kind of thing. So maybe the best he could do is a world where everyone's a complete asshole all the time,
Yep.
just because that's how the feasible worlds kind of came out. And the thought was that, like, in that case, it's kind of unlucky that the best he can do is not very good. Whereas
Yes.
maybe had things gone differently, all the feasible worlds have us. Well, maybe not all of them, but there are some feasible worlds where everyone's amazing all the time. So he just goes, "Oh, I'll just pick one of those ones," and then all of a sudden he's like actualized loads of goodness. But the only reason he was able to do that is because he was kind of lucky in how the feasible worlds kind of came about. So, and then the thought was just like, um, you want to ascribe praiseworthiness to him, you want to ascribe praise to him on the basis of how much goodness he actualizes. But how much goodness he actualizes, or how much goodness he can actualize, is kind of out of his control to some large extent. Because it just happens. He's like the guy who, he might be like the guy who gets shipped off to Argentina and lives a comfortable life. Or he might be like the guy who accidentally wakes up in Nazi Germany. His like options might be way worse or way better. And
Yeah.
the span of his options is not something that he controls. So in that sense, if we would sort of shake our fists at God and say, "God, you should have done better than you actually did," we would be ascribing like blame to him, or at least less praise, right? And we'd be justified in doing that because he would have done like less goodness than he otherwise could have done. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So and so then, what's the conclusion of this argument then? That so it's certainly not that like God doesn't exist or that Molinism is false necessarily, right? So what's the conclusion? What should we draw from this?
Um, well, in the paper specifically, my aim is just to like raise the theoretical cost of Molinism and say, hey, this might look pretty attractive, but here's like one issue that needs to be dealt with. And I remember, and I told you this when before we went live, that I was a self-ascribed Molinist. I'm very sympathetic to Molinism. I really like Molinism. Like I fell in love with Molinism. It was maybe my first love of different models of divine providence. But I remember when I was in grad school, one of my professors, um, him and I would talk about Molinism, and he would have this like objection from luck. It wasn't really like premise, conclusion, form. It was just like God seems to be very lucky at Molinism, and that kind of just stuck with me. Um, I think some of the other arguments against Molinism, I'm strong. Some are strong, some are weak, like the grounding objection. Like that seems to be like I'm not sure how to answer that. And I think even when I was a Molinist, I didn't have a strong reply to the grounding objection. But this objection just was kind of like in the back of my head. And so when I started doing all like for my dissertation on God and luck, I just thought I have to kind of like deal with this. So part of me hopes that there's like a nice and clean refutation of my paper here, and the other part of me is like, I don't know. I guess I just want Molinas to like actually like explore this in detail or in depth and say, no, actually God isn't lucky, or if he is lucky, this is not really a problem. So I don't set out to refute Molinism. Um, I just try to uncover or formulate more clearly because there have been objections to Molinism based on luck. I just try to, I guess, maybe like define the argument and clarify it.
I mean, okay. So here's one kind of objection that I thought of that somebody could make, which seemed to me that like you might say he's not lucky in the following way, right? Because like you might think it's just not contingent which worlds are feasible and which worlds are not feasible, and so what's necessary and like, what do we mean by when we say that something is necessary? Like if we say that some proposition P is necessary, what we mean is that like in every world P is true. So regardless of which world you evaluate P from, P is true. And then I was thinking, well, the way I picture the Molinist metaphysics is like a big branching tree, right? That sort of branches towards the future. Whenever you get to like a choice point where you could go left or right, you could give in to temptation or not give in to temptation. Some choice like that. Then on the Molinist view, one of those branches is like designated as the actual one from that point of view. The other one is not the actual one. So to make it clearer, you could draw a red line to indicate which one was the actual one. So let's say we consider some choice point, like that monk that we talked about at the beginning. Maybe some maiden knocks on his window late at night and tempts him to go out with him into the town or something. And he's thinking, well, I don't know, maybe it sounds fun, but maybe I want to be a monk, so whatever. He's at this choice point, right? Then let's say whether this actually happened to him or whether it's a counterfactual situation. Only one of those is what he would do, and the other one is what he wouldn't do, right? Even though they're both possible, he just is gonna go out in the town, or he just is gonna not do that. But it seems to me like if we just say, now let's suppose in the actual world, some completely different state of affairs happens. Like he goes off to Argentina and never becomes a monk, so he's not tempted, right? Still though, it's not, it's still true, whichever way it was. Let's suppose he goes out in the town and does get tempted, right, and has some fun. It's true in the world where he goes off as a child to Argentina that had he been tempted, he would have gone into town. And it's true in the world where he actually does get tempted, that when he gets tempted, he will go off into town, right? It actually doesn't vary from world to world. The counterfactual, because as you said, it's not really counterfactual, it's just conditional. It's just true in every possible world, the same result, regardless of whether it's actual or not actual. Like it's just the evaluation of that conditional is just the same, right? So isn't that just necessary then? Isn't that just what we mean by necessary? And if it's necessary, then how can we say that God's lucky? Because surely I can be lucky if something contingent happens, but you can't blame, and it's not bad luck if something necessary happens. Does that make sense?
Kind of. So I'm not sure why it would be necessary in every possible world. Okay, so possibly the monk sins. That's true in every possible world, right?
Yeah.
Even including worlds that he doesn't exist. But from the mere possibility that the monk sins, even if it's true and it's necessarily, like if something's possible, it's necessarily possible, right?
Right.
So it's necessarily possible that the monk sins. That's true in in any possible world. Like how do we get from there to, like we said about that, it's actually true, not just possibly true, or not that he could do this thing, but that he actually would, because there are some worlds in which the monk doesn't do this. Like,
Well, if we say it's true, if we put him in the circumstance and he would have given in to the temptation, then it's true in world one where he's not put in that circumstance. It's true in world two where he is put in that circumstance. It's true in every world. Like it doesn't matter which world I'm looking at it from. Wherever I look at it from, if he was in that situation, he would do this thing. And so the counterfactual that just links him being in this situation and him actually doing, A rather than B, feels like it's necessary. Because otherwise, if it's contingent, then I don't understand I don't understand. Like, could it be that, like, from the perspective of world one, the monk gives in to the temptation? Had he been in circumstance C, he would have done A rather than B. But from the perspective of world two, had he been in circumstance C, he would have done B rather than A. That doesn't seem right. I don't think the Molinist wants to say that which counterfactual is true varies from world to world. It's true in every world, isn't it?
yes, I think they would have to say that. I mean, right. So it's true in every world. But I mean, so are we saying, are you just stipulating that there are no worlds in which, like, okay, so this counterfactual, the monk and these circumstances would do X.
Mm-hmm.
There are, like, if this counterfactual is true, if it's true, that would be like a contingent truth. And if it's contingently true, like at that moment, then okay, it would be true from perspective of world B, world C, world D. But if um well, like why, I don't know, it seems like you're stipulating that like that it's true. I don't know if I'm like understanding you correctly. It could have been false, right? Like this counterfactual could have been false.
Well, I think the consequent of the counterfactual, right? So the antecedent is he's in this circumstance, and then the consequent is he gives in to the temptation,
Okay.
right? And the counterfactual is both of those together. It's if he was in this circumstance, then he would give in to the temptation. Now, I think the giving in to the temptation thing, because it's libertarian freedom, it's contingent. Clearly, he could have given in to the temptation, but he could have not given in to the
Okay.
temptation. Like both branches are possible. Like he could have done either. So the consequent of the conditional is contingent. But the whole conditional isn't contingent, because that's what God sees before his creative act. He just sees which conditionals are true and which conditionals are false. Like from the perspective of like nowhere, whatever God's perspective is, he's not in a possible world. He's, what do they call it, a semper temporalis or something, where he's just outside everything, just looking at it. So it must be necessary, whatever he sees, like the counterfactuals themselves. And so it just seems to me that maybe you'd want to say it's not exactly like he just dealt himself a poker hand and he got a good poker hand by luck. He just somehow stumbles across this structure that's just there, and then it's too late for him to do anything about it. It's even beyond his control to change which counterfactuals of creaturely freedom are feasible, isn't it? Can he change which counterfactuals of creaturely freedom are feasible? Because if he could change them, then it is under his control. It wouldn't be moral luck anymore, right?
Yeah, no, he can't change him. But I think the scenario that you just described, on that scenario, God would also be lucky, right? I mean, like it's good luck if he stumbles across this framework and it's like, oh, very nice. This counterfactual is true in all these possible worlds, and that's good for me if that counterfactual is true. But if it's like if it's something bad that the agent does, then it's bad luck if not just for one agent, but let's say it's possible that all these agents have do the bad thing, right? And then God is like, oh man, I can't even create any free creature because they're all terrible, miserable degenerates. That would also seem to be a matter of luck because that would be beyond God's control. Um,
Yeah, but I suppose my thought is that it's like um, imagine you're going to prove a theorem in mathematics, right? And then you prove it, and it turns out that it's true, say, rather than false. I mean, you could say like beforehand it seemed like it could be either true or false, and maybe you made a bet that it would be true rather than false or something. You win loads of money. I mean, were you lucky in that circumstance? I guess this is the intuition I'm feeling, is that like I'm kind of lucky, but also it's not like dealing a poker hand where something contingent happened. In fact, it was always going to be like this, and it's more like there's this like epistemic possibility that's playing out now rather than a metaphysical possibility, because it just kind of seemed like the counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, could have been different, because it seemed like they could have been so that everyone was more virtuous, or it seemed like everyone could have been more depraved. But like really, they were just all there before God did anything for them. No one's really responsible for them. They're just stuck there. They're like mathematical theorems. They're just there, and no one's responsible for them. They just happen to be what they are. Um, and like, doesn't that sort of take away in some respect? I mean, feel free to tell me this is wrong, but like, if it's something in my brain is thinking it's not the same as like flipping a coin or luck in that sense, where like the bird flies in front of the bullet, because it's not like the theorem just suddenly landed this way.
yeah.
It actually was that way before you did anything. And these counterfactuals of creaturely freedom are like there before God does any choices. So it's kind of like, I feel like a Molinist might just say it's not luck in that sense, right? It's like, at best, it's kind of epistemic. It sort of seemed like could have been differently, but there's not a sort of meta counterfactual, which is that the counterfactuals could have been different. in some other counterfactual circumstance or something.
Okay. So what do you think about this scenario? So imagine this like mathematician gets, I don't know, kidnapped, and I don't know, some terrorists are like, okay, if you don't solve this paradox in mathematics, right, this equation or something, we're gonna like, I don't know, kill your whole family. So, okay, like objectively, like there is an answer here, right? It's not a matter of luck, but if the mathematician is able to like solve this like paradox or something like that, or he like discovers this like a equation or what you were talking about in a given time frame, like surely he would be lucky, not that the formula somehow landed correctly and that or like aligned themselves correctly that he was able to solve this. He would be lucky that I mean like he would be like first of all constitutively lucky because like he was like gifted or he was really really intelligent. That's constitutive luck. Maybe something in his environment like actually helped him solve this. That would be circumstantial luck. Like I can like wouldn't it make sense to say that this mathematician is still lucky that he's able to solve this mathematical paradox or problem in a given time frame and like save his family? I mean, like we can like stipulate some things that are beyond his control in this like specific situation. But I don't know, even though it involves these like mathematical necessities, I think it's reasonable to say that no, the agent is lucky. It's like it's a matter of luck. I see what you're saying, like the different like the epistemic difference and like the metaphysical difference. Um, I don't know how that would straightforwardly apply to like Molinism because these like logical moments that God discovers, like they're logical, right? They're not epistemic. It's not like God is ignorant of the counterfactuals before they're sort of revealed. They're just like logical steps.
Yeah, that's right. The
I don't know.
epistemic bit comes in because it's where you think to yourself, well, it could have been the the counterfactuals of creature freedom might have been different. That we were way more depraved or whatever. That's how it could have been. But that sense of could there is just epistemic because really the counterfactuals of creaturely freedom are just the way they are. And it seems to me, it's like saying, imagine we've got David Lewis's possible worlds pluriverse in front of us. And every single possible way anything could have been, there is a concrete world there. And then you say to me, maybe, maybe one of these doesn't exist. That could have been the case. Maybe the whole like possible like the structure of possible worlds could have been different, and then like not really like epistemically you can kind of like think about David Lewis's possible worlds being different, but really like the notion of metaphysical possibility is just what's true in a world. It's like you've obviously changed the notion of what's going on. Like it's an epistemic account. I can just imagine one world not being there, but the actual theory that tells you what's possible and what's not possible it's just what's in a possible world. So we're obviously not using the same concept anymore when we say maybe there could have been one fewer possible world. Like that's like just an epistemic sense. But so I think that's what I'm thinking about is that like in your account it's an epistemic notion of luck. But I'm now I'm saying it out loud. I think you can just go so what, right? Who cares, right? That doesn't really matter because that's still moral luck. It's still lucky, from his point of view. It's out of his control anyway. When that's the definition in the first place that you gave of what luck is. Luck is just something that happens to you that's out of your control. And in this sense, God doesn't walk into a room and look at these things. It's not like he actually discovers them, but in a sense, he apprehends them or something. It's this logical moment where he finds out what they are. And even if there was no metaphysical possibility that they could have been different, which counterfactuals were true and which counterfactuals were false, even if that wasn't metaphysically possible, they could have been different. That's cool. I mean, let's just say it was epistemically possible, still outside of his control, and that's all that actually matters. So I think what I'm doing is I'm talking myself into thinking that it doesn't matter whether or not, like, actual metaphysical contingency doesn't actually matter. I mean, now I've sort of taken that. I've convinced myself that it doesn't need to be any metaphysical contingency involved. But I think when you started pushing back on it, I was thinking, yeah, what does this objection even get me to? It doesn't get me anywhere. It's not like God's in control of the situation. It's still completely out of his control. So then it counts as luck. So I think we're just like, I think that's just the way through this. Someone could just say convincingly, this isn't a case of metaphysical contingency. Counterfactuals of creaturely freedom are just the way they are. They're not contingent. But even if they do say that, I don't think it makes any difference to your argument. Right? You don't actually
Yeah.
need it to be contingent in that sense.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, you're right. It's like a lack of control is the most important thing here. So like when we apply that to praiseworthiness, something
Mm.
beyond God's control determines or influences or affects the amount of praise that God rightfully deserves. Um, so I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I'm not sure if I fully track with what you were saying. I'm not sure what Molinist would say about that, so I'm not a representative of Molinist. Um, but that is interesting. That might be like a different objection to Molinism, but like to the coherence, like internal coherence, which is different than what I'm doing in the paper. I'm saying, okay, if it's like I'm just taking Molinist as it's presented. So Molinists are like, yeah, counterfactuals are contingent. These creaturely world types are contingent.
Mm.
That's kind of what I'm working with.
Okay, cool. I think they do say that. That's true. Um, I guess maybe I just have a different grumble about the fact that they shouldn't say that. But then
Yeah.
I was thinking, well, even if they shouldn't say that, it doesn't actually make any difference because they could just bite the bullet and say, okay, why not? Let's just do it this other way then,
Yeah.
just to like appease me or something. And I think that I still wouldn't have an objection to your argument there. So moving on from my possibly over the top objection, what did you think of? I think I read it this morning, but I've already forgotten. You anticipated a couple of like lines of pushback that somebody might have as a Molinist against your argument, right?
That I consider in the paper, or are you talking about Eli's or
Well, we could talk about that, yeah. But I thought you raised a couple of like somebody might say this, but here's what
you
I say
know,
back to
I
them kind
did.
of thing.
I did. I already forgot. My memory sucks. I honestly, when you asked me to do this podcast, I was like, okay, what did I say about Molinism and what was the argument? And I had to like go back and I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I know that
Um,
feeling. It just gets worse the older you get as well, by the way.
don't tell me. I don't want to. Um,
Well, I guess you probably gave like some presentations of this argument. You know, did anyone say anything that made you like really stop and think to yourself, "Oh yeah, that's a good point."
no, I don't. I don't remember. I don't. I mean, I'm sure I've talked about objections, but I don't remember the specific ones. One general objection is kind of like this idea that as long as God is maximally praiseworthy in all of these worlds, it doesn't really matter that his praiseworthiness fluctuates. Because who cares? As long as God does the best that he can
Hmm.
with the counterfactuals, he's still maximally praiseworthy in that world. Like there are no beings in that world that are surpassable.
Right, right. So he's the best. What the best? As long as he's the best person in the world,
Yeah,
then that's all that matters.
that's kind of like one prominent that are objective from what I remember that people kept raising. Um, I don't know. Like one response I think that I gave in the paper is like if the counterfactuals were sufficiently bad, like they were just like terrible, and so it turns out that God could only be minimally praiseworthy in each of these worlds. It seems odd to me to say that oh, God is still maximally like technically that would be true because there are no beings more praiseworthy than God. But if
Mm.
like his praiseworthiness was so low and it was the same in all these worlds because the counterfactuals of freedom were just terrible. Um, I feel like it would kind of empty the word or the term like praiseworthiness of like what we mean by that, something like grand, right? Like worship worthiness, like these awesome um, acts, like specifically talking about action-based praiseworthiness. Um, so there are worries from like I think this is from like Jeff Speaks maybe that a perfect being has like each perfection and this collection of perfections has to be like sufficiently worthy. I think there's something to that. So in a world in which divine praiseworthiness was minimal, um, but he could still be technically maximally praiseworthy. I don't know if Molinis would be comfortable with that, like with that picture. That
Mm.
seems wrong to me.
So in a world where like everyone is depraved and constantly freely choosing the to give in to temptation and never being holy or doing anything morally good or anything, um, God maximizes as much goodness as he can by actualizing the best of the depraved worlds. But in such a world, he actualizes a world that's pretty bad. So even though it's as good as he could do, it's not good enough. And I think offends this notion of God being, he has to be at least quite good to
Yeah,
be
yeah, right.
morally perfect or whatever. It's not just like
Yeah,
morally kind of the best he could have got away with, doing the
yeah,
best he can. But
yeah.
yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
So like so compared to like a like world A in which the counterfactuals are like um two people at most sometimes perform morally good actions because God sees that man. Once you get them in a bunch, they're just acting wild. Like at most is like we like two will be okay, and then a world in which the counterfactuals are like, no, billions of people do morally good actions. In both worlds, God is maximally praiseworthy.
Mm.
Um, but one world is just so much better. Um, it seems that God just deserves more praise, like actual praise, in that world. Especially like if we bring like salvific value into the world, right? Like, okay, these people or humans have libertarian freedom. They're gonna like go wrong with respect to some actions. They're gonna go astray. They're gonna need some redemption, right? And then like when she's talking about like how many people God, I don't want to say can get into heaven, but like how many people freely accept the gospel. That makes I feel like that makes a big difference. A world in which only one person responds, and a world in which billions of people respond. But that depends on the counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, and that
Mm-hmm.
seems to make a difference. Um,
I mean, it seems to me that like I find it hard to understand, and I guess it's just going to be because I find it hard to understand the feasibility stuff in general. But like I think like a world where everyone is constantly being as mean as they possibly could be to one another, say, feels like sort of maximally depraved world, something like that. And I kind of just think, well, if God was like morally perfect, um, there's no way, and he's omnipotent, let's say, and omniscient. There's just no way he's going to bring that world into being, right? It's, it couldn't happen. Or a world
right.
where we just uh, cause pain, unnecessary suffering to one another constantly. As soon as you wake someone up into a world, it's just immediately attacking everyone. Everyone's doing that. Like orcs in Lord of the Rings, they just as soon as you get them up, they're just like, let's go, come. Like he just wouldn't make a world like that, right? So, um, if God's necessary, then that and he's omnipotent and blah blah blah, then that's actually not a possible world. Like it might be like logically possible in the sense that there's not a contradiction. I mean, it kind of is a contradiction because I kind of feel like somehow I can't really draw it as a modus ponens exactly, but like it just feels like his goodness kind of just means he wouldn't make that world. In which case, it's not even the on the scaffolding of all the like possible worlds. It's outside of that. He kind of excludes those. So by its nature, there's only going to be worlds that are pretty good. I suppose it's because I'm thinking of like that basically is the problem of evil. That's why you think like, well, there wouldn't be worlds with loads of suffering in because he just wouldn't let them happen. But he also just definitely wouldn't let worlds that are maximally bad. Um, But I think the Molinist wants to say something like, well, there could have been worlds, like if these counterfactuals are creaturely freedom, there is a branch you can take where I keep picking the bad option, right? It might have been that that's the feasible world, and the ones where I keep picking the good action are not feasible. But it just seems like it feels like it pulls in the opposite direction to this intuition I have that like if God was perfectly good and could do anything, then he would just not do certain things. They would be kind of eliminated. Do you see what I mean? I'm not
Yeah.
sure how to reconcile that.
Well, I think like, yeah, good. So what I try to do in the paper is show that whether or not God has any actualizable worlds, feasible worlds for him to create is a matter of luck. So, right, if these worlds were all, if they all fell below like the sufficient goodness standard, like whatever that is, God would just like his perfect nature, like right, like it would just like be metaphysically impossible for God to actualize this world given his nature.
Mm.
Okay. But whether or not there are any worlds that are in alignment with his goodness and perfect nature is a matter of luck. Um, so
Mm.
yeah, like like when God looks at the worlds that are available, this is like very anthropomorphic, but God is like, oh, nice. I really wanted some people that do some goods all the time. And okay, nice. We have a few options, not too many, but we have some options. Um, because this is like outside of God's control, whether or not whether he actualized a world that's good enough or because his nature would preclude actualizing like really bad worlds, but just whether there are any live candidates like at all, because the counterfactuals could have all flipped a certain way that people would be like transworldly depraved or damned, or which would be even worse off. So like the counterfactuals could have been such that nobody would ever accept the gospel if they heard the call. Then all of these people would none of them would ever make it to heaven. Like that could have been a possibility. And okay, plausibly, a perfectly good God would not actualize a world in which everyone is damned. But whether or
Mm.
not, like, he can actualize a world in which some people make it to heaven seems also a matter of luck, because it depends on like which counterfactuals he's working with true counterfactuals he's working with. Um, and that seems to be problematic. And just I guess at face value.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So, one way to get around this problem, then, I suppose, would just be to say, well, I guess Molinism isn't the right theory then, right? So we'll just drop all this talk about feasible worlds and middle knowledge and stuff. It's just God could make any world, and He's picked this one, and we have to just have another theodicy, some other way of dealing with why there's evil and how freedom and stuff fits together.
Yeah.
Um, or okay, so maybe we should talk about the height of response then. So
Yeah.
you published this paper in the Philosophical Quarterly, which is a really good journal, actually. I say that because I had a paper published there, so it must be a really good journal, obviously. Um,
I was
but
surprised. I was surprised, like everyone else, that it got in. I was kind of like, you know what? Why not? Whatever.
why not?
So
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
I was like, hey,
Yeah, cool.
good luck. Right? It was a stroke of good luck.
Hmm. Well, was it? It was within your control, I think. Actually. So
Partly, partly
partly,
within my control.
yeah, okay, yeah. You have to get good reviewers. That's true. They have to be sensible.
Well, here's the thing: whether or not somebody, the actual reviewer, gives you a good or bad review, depends on like situational factors outside of like their control. If they're in a bad mood and they happen to, after a long day, and they open my paper, then there's a pretty good chance that they're just like already irritated, right? And like all these things factor how whether or not it gets accepted. I toyed around with the idea of publishing a paper just about the luck involved in publishing itself. That it's mostly a matter of like based on like considerations like that. But anyway,
Yeah, that would be cool. Um, but then this guy Eli Haitov published or got a it's like a note, discussion note. It's not really a paper as such. It was like, what is it, like 10 pages long or
pretty
something?
short. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was under 10 pages. Yeah.
And I think what that means is like there's like a research paper or whatever would be like a kind of normal fare for for an academic journal, and then sometimes they have things like book reviews or some like one or two other types of things. And these discussion notes are sometimes they're kind of like it's like three quarters of a paper or something. It's not really. I think it probably still gets peer reviewed. Maybe the editor checks it first or something like that. It's not quite the same, and it can be shorter. And sometimes it means that it could be like a small kind of gripe or something, or whatever correction, something like that it could be in. So it's I think that's what we're looking at. It's a discussion note. So it's like a smaller thing, but whatever. Um, Now he has a different objection. Well, maybe you should set out how he took his. Like, what do you think Kaitov's pushback was to
I
your
think his main
your
claim is
argument?
that I basically assumed a action-centered account of praiseworthiness, or specifically divine praiseworthiness. He's like, yeah, it makes sense that we praise human agents for morally good actions, but this doesn't really apply to God. God is maximally praiseworthy just in virtue of who he is. So praiseworthiness is just grounded in God's essential nature. And so praiseworthiness couldn't vary from world to world because God's nature is, I mean, it's essential and it's stable across worlds. So basically, so he concludes that God is not subject to luck, circumstantial luck. I don't think that conclusion follows. At most, what would follow is God is not subject to circumstantial moral luck, but God would still be subject to luck. Like I could rewrite my whole paper not in terms of moral luck, so we don't even talk about like praiseworthiness, but about just um, circumstantial luck, like simplicator, just factors beyond my control that influence what I do. I think that would still be a problem for Molinism. But anyway, so I think that was his main sort of contention. He did say a few things that I agreed with. So he said like maybe this isn't really exclusively a problem for Molinism. Okay, like I can grant him that. And in fact, in my dissertation, I noted that circumstantial moral luck would be a problem for any view of divine providence that wants to hold um, divine providence and posits that humans have libertarian free will. So, okay, it's not exclusively aimed at Mo. I think this would probably be a problem for like open theists as well. It wouldn't be a problem for like theological determinists where God just like determines everything. Um, okay, but like, so what? Like, if this raises the cost of other theories and Molinism, that doesn't mean it's like not a problem. Um,
Yeah, it's not an objection to you to say that
yeah,
your objection also applies to a different range of theories. Like,
yeah.
okay, good. Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I thought that's something like worth thinking about, and I have thought about it for a few days. So I don't know how like coherent these thoughts would be. I guess I was trying to like just take the intuitive account of praiseworthiness, and like we praise people for their morally good acts. So when God does something good, we can ask, okay, look, when God acts, we can ask, was this action good? Good is a evaluative moral term, I dare say. So if God's action is good and it's like morally good, we can say, it seems that we can say, okay, God is praiseworthy for that morally good actions, because unless we empty the concept of like good actions entirely of its like moral content or connotations, it seems
Mm.
plausible to me to ascribe praiseworthiness to God for his actions, not exclusively. And I make this distinction in my paper. Like I'm perfectly fine, and I think that's right that we ascribe praiseworthiness to God for who he is, but also for his actions specifically. I mean, to me, I'm not a biblical scholar, but like to me, the numerous passages like in the Bible says like praise him for his wondrous works. If
Right.
works is like actions and praise means what I think it means, I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess we would have to look up like the Hebrew word from like Psalms. But it seems the Bible commands us to praise God for his good works.
Yeah, well, I think the Bible has basically mixed messages on this. I think some bits of it say that, and some bits of it say, well, I'm far from a Bible scholar myself, obviously, but like in I take it the message of the book of Job is something along the lines of like, you know, you, you have to you have to just kind of even if bad stuff happens to you, you still have to like praise God anyway, right? So you don't just sort of go, damn it, you know, you killed my wife and my kids and now I'm alone or something. You have to say, oh well, you know, I still love God, he's amazing or something. And that's the so in that sense it's independent of what he does. But then I think there are other bits where they say exactly the opposite, where you well not exactly the opposite, but like that you should praise him when he does good stuff. But presumably you can't just praise someone when they do good stuff. You have to also shake your fist at them when they do bad stuff. So it does feel like, in a sense, there's both of those messages. I'm not sure how compatible they are. I mean, maybe different biblical authors have different ideas of this concept in mind, and they're struggling between each other to tell
Yeah.
the story in the right way. So yeah, I kind of feel like you could find Bible quotes that support either of these two views. Um, Nonetheless, though, I think I agree with what you were saying a moment ago that it does seem a bit strange to say, well, when it comes to God, I have to say that he's morally praiseworthy, but by morally praiseworthy, I detach that value entirely from the things that he does. I mean, it seems to me that it could only be a different notion of praiseworthiness. Like when we talked right at the beginning about, like, you might say Usain Bolt's really good at running or whatever, and you have a positive attitude towards him on that basis, like who he is and what he is, he's good at running. But when he helps an old lady across the road, now you're praising him in a moral sense because of what he did. And I think that's just an intuitive notion of like good action. Person who does good action is good. That's very simple. And am I not allowed to say that about God when he does good stuff? It feels wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I just don't know why I'm
Yeah.
not supposed to do that.
Yeah, and it's the like I guess the troubling implication would be that God's sort of like standing or our appraisal of God's like even uh, character, what he does, has nothing to do with his like actions.
Hmm.
Like yeah, I don't know. Like if God can actualize a minimally sufficiently good world that's like compatible with his nature. Let's say these are not bad worlds; they're like just barely minimally good, and then a world that's like a million times better. Like if divine actions can't be praised in terms of like praiseworthiness or like some sort of like moral content, then we would have to say it doesn't matter which of those worlds God prefers. Like this doesn't say anything at all about his goodness. Um, like a sufficiently minimally good world and a like let's say there is the best of all possible worlds or a multitude of possible worlds. Well, it seems that like if God actualized the really good world, like I don't know that would say something about him. Like he would be more praiseworthy,
Yeah.
even if two actions are compatible with his nature. Well, one example, like illustration I give of this in the paper is like let's say um, you're a virtuous person, you're like very generous, and you're like I'm playing for the lottery and I'm gonna donate I don't know, like 10% of whatever I win. I'm gonna just donate this to the homeless and the poor. So in one world you win $1,000, so you donate 10%. Okay, that's pretty good. Like you're still praiseworthy. But in another world you win like $4.8 billion and you donate 10% of that. Okay, like in both you've kept your word, you're praiseworthy, you've done something morally right. Um, but surely you're more praiseworthy in the world in which you donate vast, right? Like vastly more, much more money
Yeah.
than in world A. It's not that it reflects on your nature. because both are compatible with your nature, right? It's just that in one you got a lot more lucky and you deserve more praise. Um, so it doesn't like stem from your nature because luck is something that's beyond your control. It was just beyond your control that you won 4.8 billion instead of just $1,000.
Well, even if it's just the sort of concept is a step back from that. Like, even if it is under your control, suppose suppose the suppose that like the amount of goodness is a scale that goes from 1 to 100, and God can't actualize worlds that are like 50% good or less, because that's like below the minimum threshold, right? So then we consider two possible things he does. He actualizes a world that's got 51 units of goodness, and another one where it's got 99 units of goodness, completely under his control. No moral luck coming into it as such. Just the thought would be like, if he could have actualized the 99 units of goodness, if he just chose to actually, just like, nah, just not going to do that. Weird. It would be like a failing almost. It would be difficult to say, well, no, he's equally good in both worlds. Like, surely the better thing to do would be to actualize the world that has a greater goodness units in. I mean, it's a bit of a superficial example, right? It's not very realistic, but if there was no reason to not do it, if everything else was the same and he has complete control over what happened, I think that cateris paribus there, you've got to say it's a better choice to actualize the world with more goodness in than the one with less goodness in. Certainly, if they both meet the threshold, you can't just sort of say, well, they're both equal just because they're above some minimum threshold. No, they're not equal. One's better than the other. So one choice was better than the other. And a maximally perfect being, I don't know what else it means apart from the fact that they would pick the best option.
Yeah.
I'm a better person than you if I help more old ladies across the road than you do. Cateris paribus, right? That's just what it means. So if we have to sort of throw that notion away when we talk about God being good, I just feel like we're throwing away like the content of what it means to say that God is good. I just don't know what it means then otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
That would be my problem.
I think you're exactly right. Like if moral evaluation, like whatsoever, applies to God, maybe not univocally, probably not univocally, but even analogously, like, then yeah, we would say that one of those actions is better than the other. And if it's better, it seems that it deserves more. Like, I don't know, we could use a different word than praise. Like, what about like credit? An agent is like credited with more. I don't know, something like he deserves more credit by bringing about a better state of affairs. And we can't just say, well, both like worlds are compatible with the agent's goodness. Like, okay, yes, but why wouldn't the agent bring about a morally better state of affairs if it's like all else being equal, right? That was possible. So I don't know, like, I mean, it's fine, like, if the criticism is like I should have maybe just not assumed this agent-centered account of praiseworthiness. Like, it could have been maybe more. I guess I thought the biblical evidence and just philosophical intuitions would get me would be enough. But that's fine. That's like, I guess that might be a fair critique. Like, okay, I need to say something more about this and defend this account of action-centered divine praiseworthiness at least. I mean, he made the distinction between like praise and being thankful for something. That's fine. Although I think gratitude is also like a species of praise, probably. So, okay, like if then the amount of gratitude that God gets from world to world is also dependent on these counterfactuals, and if human beings being grateful to God is a good thing, then that's a good state of affairs. Counterfactuals determine how much gratitude is given to God in each world. That's also beyond God's control. So I think my argument could be reformulated in terms of gratitude and not praise, because it's good to give God praise. Well, if billions of people give God's grace and there's like more goodness in the world, yes, both worlds are compatible in which only one person gives gratitude to God. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I've just been thinking about this for a few days, but something along those lines, like I think the argument would still go through with gratitude. And like I said, even if it
Yeah,
doesn't work with moral luck, I think it'd be recast in terms of just non-moral circumstantial luck.
yeah, I think that's right. I think he also said something about like if that your argument doesn't have anything to like even if you assume that he is in control of counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, he couldn't be maximally praiseworthy just because for any possible world that has, however much praiseworthiness he has in that possible world, there's another one where he would have more praiseworthiness because like maybe there's like a billion people in this world, so he gets like that much praise. But it could be a billion and one, right? And in which case he would get more praise, or he would
Yeah.
be more praiseworthy because he would have made one more, virtuous person or something. Um, but then it seemed like a strange thing to say because, like, I mean, okay, yeah. So what that's doing is it's saying that if like goodness is unbounded, right? So it could just keep. You could always add more to goodness. It's like the natural numbers. It could just keep going forever. Um, then you can't have a maximal being. There's no such thing as maximally good because no matter how much goodness you have, there could be more goodness. I mean, well, if that sounds like a fun argument, obviously, but like, is he endorsing that argument? Because if he is, it just seems like then that means there can't be a maximally good being. That's what that means.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what Rowe's conclusion was, right?
right.
Um, yeah, and so he's using Rowe's argument to say, oh, well, if divine praise is action centered, then there can't be a divine being. And he doesn't give an argument why Rowe's conclusion is wrong. I think he just rejects my account of divine praiseworthiness. But if my account of if my argument goes through about moral luck, then it just means that his account of divine praiseworthiness is wrong. Um, I mean, he introduces Rowe's argument, but he doesn't. It's almost in passing, but that is an interesting argument. But like that argument just assumes there's like only one intrinsic value, right? If there are multiple values, there could be like a different combination of the way that we reach maybe unsurpassable world. That argument assumes that there's like no intrinsic maximum for that value. If there are such maxima, then like maybe there's an unsurpassable world or multiple unsurpassable worlds. I remember writing a paper like in grad school about how Molinism actually as a response to William Rowe, how Molinism like makes it possible for God to actualize the unsurpassable world. Um, but yeah, I mean, like one conclusion is that God doesn't exist. The other conclusion is different. Like, what's that saying? Like a Morian shift, basically, right? Like
Yeah.
you can do some stuff like that on here. And also, okay, so maybe Rowe's problem is a problem for all sort of theistic models. Okay, so it's
Yeah.
still a problem for Molinism, and Molinism seems to make the problem worse because these are these counterfactuals of freedom that do not depend on God's control. So Molinists have Rowe's problem plus its own distinct problem of counterfactuals limiting which worlds are actualizable for God. So it's not just his nature, right, that limits the worlds. It's something like extrinsic, something external to God. Um, yeah. So yeah, it might be that Molinism makes the problem worse for
Mhm.
theists. Um, so that's the kind of thought that I had with respect to Rowe's dilemma there.
Cool. All right. Well, look. Last thing then, I wanted to just sort of cheekily point out that I think Molinism can't be true anyway, right? So this has been a fun conversation to have, but I mean, the grounding problem, right? There's no like what, where do these infeasible worlds come from, right? In virtue of what is it the case that had I been in circumstance C, I would have freely done A rather than B? In virtue of what? Nothing, right? Just hangs on in empty space with nothing holding it up. God just like opens a door and looks in and goes, "Ah, well, it's true that if Alex had been in this circumstance, he would have been tempted." But like, how come? Right? Where did that come from? And I just think that Molina's uh, answer is kind of interesting, right? When we started off by saying he was trying to reconcile these different, he wants to keep God's like sovereignty, aseity, or whatever, and creatures being free, but the cost to it is that you have this big mystery that you can't say anything about. Like you have to, the pill you have to swallow is like, just let me have an infinite number of like brute contingent counterfactuals, and then I can give you a theory that works. But it's such a big pill to swallow, right? That seems to me the problem with Molinism. It's like kind of there's this, it's like gratuitously, I don't know what the word is. It sort of offends some theoretical virtue that I can't quite put my finger on. But it's like you're not allowed to just have that many like ungrounded contingent facts. You know, like I suppose it's violating the principle of sufficient reason or something. Do you know what I mean? That's where I feel just can't get my head around that part of it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, I think that is a problem. It's been a while since I looked at the grounding problem literature. I remember reading Trenton Merrick's book, and I was like, oh, maybe there's something here, but I wouldn't be able to rehash his argument. But I don't know. I guess like, oh, let me ask you, are you a fan of libertarianism?
Not really. No, I think
Okay,
I'm a
so this
compatibilist.
won't really have any pull on you, but it's kind of the same thing. Like, what is it that like grounds the difference between you choosing like to do A, right, at the moment of decision, and choosing B? Like when we compare these two possible worlds, um, it seems there's nothing in virtue of the agent that explains why you did A rather than B. Because
Yeah.
if we hold identical, you know, like the laws and everything about you, your deliberation, you get to the point of decision, and world A you choose one way, and world B you choose another. And if we press
Hmm.
rewind, you would have chosen like different things, different like what is it that explains this libertarian choice? Um,
Yeah.
um, uh, which, funny enough, I also published another paper on the present luck objection. So if God has libertarian free will, there's this would be like another way that God is subject to luck, because a lot of theists do think that God has libertarian free will. And so like what explains divine choices, like when we take this
Absolutely.
cross-world difference into account. Um, and I'm also libertarian, so I don't know. I'm just I'm just digging my own hole here. I'm not sure how to resolve these problems. Um,
But then I
but
think if you like that libertarian picture and you want to have free choices, then you should be an alchemist. And by that I mean you would have the same thing where there's a tree that branches towards the future, but instead of saying that at each node in the tree there's one branch is the actual one and the others are not actual. Instead of that, you just have one line that goes up the tree. That's the actual world, and all of the others are just possible worlds. And then if you say, what what grounds my choice to do A rather than B, it's just that that's the actual one, and the others are not the actual one. And the actuality is the symmetry breaker, right? There's one thin red line that goes all the way up the tree. Everything else is non-actual. That's what's actual. So when I say, why did I do A rather than B? It's nothing about me that decides that, but that's just what the actual world is like. So it's a bit like in the B theory, right? Then the future, there are times later than this moment that I'm talking about now, and in those times in the future, let's say the coin lands heads or something, and that's what, if you want to talk about grounding, that's the only thing that grounds now the fact that if I say I'm going to flip the coin and it will land heads, that's just because in the actual future it does land heads, and that's it. Then when you talk about counterfactuals, you say had I flipped the coin, it would have landed heads. I'm going to say that's false. You say okay, had I flipped the coin and it would have landed tails, I'm going to say that's false as well because nothing grounds either of those options.
yeah,
Had I flipped the coin, then it either would have landed heads or would have landed tails. That's true, just because it's logically true. But nothing grounds those things. And I think that's an easier pill to swallow. If you want to be a libertarian and have God's omniscience and blah blah blah, just be an alchemist. Don't be a Molinist.
Um,
That's
okay,
what
so
that's what I would sell to you. If I would sell
so I
it
have
to
two
you.
questions. Like, okay, so how would this avoid the? So would God know these different thin red lines for each individual person before they're even created? Like at the logical moment prior to creation, does God see like your map, your tree, the thin red line,
Yeah, there's just one
and
like be theoretic just block of what happens in space time.
before you even exist?
Well, before outside of time, it's just
Yeah.
all there. Yeah,
I don't know if that's compatible with the libertarian picture. I mean, doesn't
it might not.
libertarianism
Yeah.
and huh?
It might be only compatible with it in a weak sense. I agree, but I think
Yeah,
that's probably still good enough.
good enough libertarianism. Yeah, this is the best we can do.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I can't. Yeah, I have to go into more detail about it, but I'm only joking really. I mean, you can believe anything you like. I'm not trying to change your mind about it, but it was just that I always found, yeah, and no theory is perfect, right? You always have to like, you bite some bullet here, you get some theoretical utility here, but you make some concessions over there or something. It's up to you which compromise you feel most comfortable with at the end of the day. But to me, I just thought that because, I guess because I'm not worried about trying to preserve a particularly strong notion of libertarian free will, I was thinking that the best version you can get, you can still draw all the different branches, and you think like in some sense they're there, but like not like a very strong sense. And if you like that, if you
Yeah.
like that part of the compromise, then you might be okay with that. But yeah, maybe not if you don't.
Yeah, I don't think libertarians will like that. The- but I mean, as you know, there are objections to like Molinism based actually from libertarian sort of worries, right? Like that actually, if these counterfactuals are true, independent of any like of my like volitions or anything like that, then like yeah, I also don't make those libertarian actions because that's already there's like a counterfactual about that. So when the time comes for me
Yeah.
to make a decision, that counterfactual has been true way, way, way before I even like deliberated or thought about or even existed.
Right. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
there's
Yeah.
that, yeah. But
Okay. Cool. Sorry. If go on. What were you going to say?
no, 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 no.
Well, I was
I
going to
was
wrap things up just because I can hear my wife's like getting ready for bed in the other room,
okay.
and currently I'm living in this little flat because we've moved to Edinburgh, but we haven't moved into a house yet. We're renting a flat, so it's quite it's not very big, and it's annoying if I keep doing a podcast when she's trying to go to bed. So I have this like hard cut off of time.
Listening to
So
nerds talk about philosophy. Yeah, nobody wants to hear that before bed. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But it's worse than that because I've got headphones in, so she can't even hear you. It'd just be listening to me talk in
That's
silence.
right. That's right.
So yeah, okay. It's been really fun. Thanks for coming on and talking to me about your paper.
Likewise, thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Cool.
Thank you so
Nice
much, Alex.
one.
Yeah, have a
Well,
good
I
night.
will talk to you again soon. Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah. Bye.